know the look. She's rail thin, stringy, bleached hair, eyeliner streaming down her face, short skirt, exposed skin, bra straps showing. Maybe she's already tied up or passed out or incapacitated. You know who she is. And in the horror genre, you know exactly what's going to happen to her. Across genres, film and television have been mocking and demeaning ex-workers seemingly since the dawn of time. CSI and SVU, any given HBO show like True Detective or Game of Thrones, and plenty of popular 2000s comedies like Family Guy, Two and a Half Men, and Arrested Development. They presented to us the oops we killed a stripper trope, endless trafficking and abuse victims, and scenes of scantily clad rambunctiousness. R.I.P. Roz. It is genuinely quite difficult pre-2010s to find depictions of ex-work that don't involve violence or punch-down comedy. These stereotypes are pervasive and extremely negative, and that's before we even get in to the horror. Today we are going to peek into the world of cinematic sex work as it is depicted in my beloved genre of horror. As this is my full-time job and I cannot afford to play with YouTube's monetization rules, I will be self-censoring and saying X work from here on out. Also worth saying that this script has been looked over by an industry professional who has A-okayed the language, but of course they are only one person, so take that with a grain of salt. And before we dredge up the real goo and the gore, I want to say a quick thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Raycon. If you're looking for a thoughtful gift to get someone who enjoys music or podcasts or wanting to improve your own daily function, Raycon's essential open earbuds are the perfect way to go. And right now you can have them for 15% off. I'm not a fan of typical earbuds because I get uncomfortable with stuff pushed into my ears, and classic clunky headphones make me headachy if I wear them for long stretches. So these have become my absolute go-to that I wear every day, walking and cycling around London. As you can see, the essential open ear design is lovely and dainty and super lightweight, so you barely feel you're wearing them, but the hook design means they stay on even if you're flapping about, as you can see. Personally, I dislike earbuds that block everything out because you can't hear things like car horns or someone calling out to you, but Raycon's open ear design sits just outside your ear canal, allowing for amazing audio clarity while still being aware of the world around you. I feel so much safer this way, and with one little tap, the sound is off if I need it. The essential open earbuds come in this sleek little charging case, which provides 36 hours battery life for 8 hours of playtime. So you could wear them for an entire long-haul flight or hike without even popping them back in the case. And for me, I find one charge a week is enough. And for many more reasons, over 3 million customers have chosen Raycon, with the sound quality just as good as other more expensive brands, but half the cost with a 30-day guarantee. The essential open earbuds are the perfect gift for anyone seeking a safe sensory option or for yourself. So click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/girlonfilmopen to get 15% off. And thank you Raycon for sponsoring this sordid little video. To put it gently, there is a lot of low-end slop out there. The 70s offered a slew of giallo-style eroticism and sexploitation films. These didn't go too heavy on the violence, but seemed most focused on finding a reason to put half-naked women with doe eyes and bouncy blowouts on screen. The murder was practically a bonus. Following suit, cheaply made and mostly forgotten ex-worker-centered films littered the 80s and 90s. It's ridiculous how many films there are out there called Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers and Hookers in a Haunted House, and most of these are setting up our gals as targets of a serial killer, all heavy on postcode titillation. Note that so far, not a single film I've mentioned has, to public knowledge, been directed either by an ex-worker or a woman, and yet all depict female ex-workers in various states of distress and undress. Nail check. Guys, aren't they cute? I did them myself because I have no nails. Because I like and playing guitar. 2000s onwards, concurrent with the popularity of torture porn and horror comedies, you'll find a stream of low-budget nasties that position ex-workers as Bambi-limbed victims of extreme violence. And of course, these films are still being made now. I See You, Confessions of a Homicidal Prostitute. I'd merit a guess that most casual horror fans or younger horror fans, which I would include myself in as a 30-year-old, haven't watched a lot of these. They are more sought out by a particular kind of viewer who probably has a media room and drawer full of crunchy t-shirts, or clusters of teenagers looking for something crack up to rip bongs to. And I don't often mention this kind of subcultural cinema, if we can call it cinema, but I think it's important to see how these kinds of films contribute to the general backdrop, laying the groundwork of violence and sexploitation. Regardless of these, plenty more mainstream and even acclaimed horrors have featured ex-work along the way in less than flattering tributes. In 1960, co-director of Black Narcissus and the Red Shoes, Michael Powell, gave us Peeping Tom. This is the earliest piece of serious horror cinema I found that dealt heavily with ex-work, as protagonist Mark makes snuff films with hired victims. The film does not actually feature any rolling in the hay and only some tasteful nudity, but the subject matter is undoubtedly provocative and the female characters have near no autonomy. While it nearly ruined Powell's career, it's now widely considered a proto-slasher masterpiece. The lasting damage done to its subject matter. Of course, it was only a matter of time before the ex-worker serial killer was introduced to silver screens, because the trope is grounded in reality. Jack the Ripper is one of the most famous serial killers, and his grisly tale is frequently spun as one of Victorian prostitutes being stalked down in alleyways until their gruesome deaths. A little fact-checking here, and I would recommend the Rest is History's Jack the Ripper series, shows that this well-trod case isn't exactly as it appears. Jack the Ripper is one person thought to have murdered 5 women in 1888 in London. His famous moniker given in a letter to the police by someone claiming to be the already famed murderer during the year of the killings. As for the link to ex-work, what we do know is that 3 of the victims were sleeping in the streets on the night of their murders, though it has never been confirmed that any of them were selling X. But people love to spin a moral tale, and the world's oldest profession is also taught to us as one of the world's most immoral practices. So what better way to push the idea known in the horror genre as sex equals death than spinning a centuries-long yarn that old Jack targeted ex-workers? It's a fable, a morality tale, but it worked, seeping into the public consciousness from the late 1800s onwards as a warning to wayward girls not to find themselves alone at night with potentially dangerous strangers. So the legendary tale of the Ripper is not the example of this trope people want it to be, but there are many legitimate examples of killers who have targeted ex-workers, such as Peter Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, Gary Ridgway, Joel Rifkin, and Steve Wright. These cases considered killers targeting ex-workers specifically is a known phenomenon. While 1980s classic Maniac sees a similar tale of a serial killer stalking women, the first of his victims a prostitute, thankfully there's a little more variation in the role of ex-workers in better-known hits of the 80s and 90s. Dressed to Kill sees a call girl in a leading role, though you have to wonder whether this was a plot convenience introduced to set up her seduction of another character. Cult classic comedy horror Frankenhooker sounds on the surface like a generic exploitation flick, but it's pleasantly subversive with themes of objectification and male fantasy and a revenge subplot. However, some tropes can't be avoided. Ex-workers are herded and killed to make up the body of our titular Frankenhooker, and there's plenty of full nudity and sex. John Carpenter's Vampires has an ex-worker bitten by a vampire in a leading role. She is scented and she lives, and her work is largely irrelevant, although we do see her nude and tied to a bed at one point. This is starting to sound a little bit like one of those parental guides. I am not a prude. I am not a crook. Sorry. And who can forget the terrifying post-coital massacre in American Psycho, notably directed by a woman and no less graphic than previous offerings. To fly through the 2000s, several exploitation and grindhouse-style films saw ex-workers as victims of killers, abuse, and generally ugly life circumstances that led them to their work, including a few Kramer victims in the Saw franchise. See here for my extensive thoughts on that. 2010 horror We Are What We Are gave us another scene of streetwalkers enacting revenge on someone who harmed them, and a Serbian film of the same year, centers horn actor Milo in its twisted snuff plot. I know a lot of people will argue there's way nastier stuff out there, but of accessible nasties, a Serbian film truly goes there with horrific acts of X and violence. Every kind of X crime you can think of is in there, so not one to watch with grandma. Unless grandma is a freak like that. Also, this premiered at South by Southwest. I don't know, that kind of blew my mind. Like, I just never imagined this film being viewed in an auditorium, like, with an audience, let alone a South by crowd. I would not want to be in that theater, my god. But despite its extreme content, a Serbian film is far less a dismissal or demonization of X work, and more so a commentary on exploitation itself, and according to the director, Serbian politics. This bevy of offerings has laid out several recognizable tropes. The hired kill, the accidental death, the tragic junkie. The main takeaway from all of these is that ex-workers in horror seem to exist to die. Each trope further pushes the dehumanization of women, particularly in the industry, even in instances with revenge plot lines. Never shown to have families, rarely shown to have loved ones at all, rarely centered in the stories, and so often drawn briefly into the world of the film to be hacked and disposed of with barely a word uttered to give any sense that they are a person. These depictions also present ex-workers visually and in action as the diametric opposite to the virginal final girl. Not even the promiscuous best friend who gets a personality and a few scenes to play with. Her killing is justified to audiences on this basis. She is immoral. She is committing a woman's greatest crime by giving away what we in the Christian West and so many other cultures have determined and taught women is not ours to give. But it will one day be claimed by a man, and we are expected to give it over to him when he asks. If you're interested in the academic backing of this promiscuity leading to death argument, please check out this video I did a few years ago. I didn't want to go over all of the same information in this video, but the two very much exist in tandem. That said, assigning a character the single trait of El Prostituto is also a cheap shorthand on screen to show that they have hit rock bottom, that they're the dregs of society, depraved, destitute. To say, of course, they've ended up in a world where murder takes place because their world is already so unprincipled. Both the immorality and destitution are such cheap writing tricks that lean on people's worst instincts and lack of empathy. Thinking that calling a hooker is enough to make an audience comfortable with her passing death. That putting a girl in ripped stockings and smudged kohl eyeliner is equivalent to writing a backstory, for it conjures such a strong image of the death of the American dream. It's just lazy. The films I've outlined also indulge in another lazy writing trope. with the character's profession allowing for easy insertions of scenes of nudity and sexualized violence. This intersection of eroticism and depravity is craved by many a horror audience. Think back to our crusty t-shirt owners, and predominantly produced and consumed by men who take a particular kind of trauma-free pleasure in it. Again, see my video about why we like to watch hot women die. So that is the trope in horror summed up. And I'm sure there are things I've missed because there always are, even when they seem incredibly obvious. But impact on the story aside, what is the real world impact of hookers in horror? All of this suggests, when consumed without a critical lens, that the objectification of ex-workers outside their work, i.e. without their consent, is acceptable. To make fun of them in films only makes it okay to make fun of them in real life. That's almost a Tina Fey quote. Cinema sets the standard that it's okay to view ex-workers as less than human, objects, bodies, kills. Obviously, all sex workers have different experiences, completely different reasons for being in the work, different preferences when it comes to language, which is to say that they're a group that can't be generalized. But there are some fairly widely acknowledged ideas across X industries in real-world advocacy for X work, as activists in many countries pursue decriminalization. The Swedish model is famed for decriminalizing selling X, although it is a movement driven by radical feminism that still considers the work to be wrong and the women working victims of patriarchy. Personally, I ride for the New Zealand model, which decriminalizes selling and buying X, treating it as a real profession with mostly the same legal rights as other professions. Without these models implemented in the law, real-life X work can be extremely dangerous in many countries, as criminalization reduces legal support. I.e., if you're SA'd while working, you theoretically can't get help from the police. And the way horror films perpetuate the idea that ex-workers are immoral lowlives only good for a killing reduces the public support necessary to make the industry safe and draw wider support for these decriminalization models. I have had conversations with smart, kind, well-meaning people who cannot see the industry as anything other than one filled with damaged people, though they have never met an ex-worker in real life. Their view is formed almost entirely via media depictions, entirely by horror stories. This lack of legal and public safety leads to real-life horrors, with ex-workers killed at a disproportionate rate. And here we find a snake eating its own tail. Murderers killing workers because they believe they won't get caught killing a legally unsupported group. This happens so much so in real life that the killing of ex-workers becomes a trope on screen, which is presented so often it then reinforces the idea to people world over that objectification and death are all ex-workers are good for. Two of the key issues in ex-worker representation on screen are the content overlooking the genuine horrors and realities faced in the industry, and simply not presenting ex-workers as normal, fully fleshed out people. But there are some recent offerings that have rectified this. The Menu and the X trilogy put ex-workers in their leading roles. Margot is a high-class escort. Maxine, a young and hungry horn actress with dreams of making it big. While we have varied degrees of insight into their lives and still a tendency for a tragic backstory, the characters drive the narrative, overcoming evils and getting most of the screen time. They're not just bodies, they're not just plot conveniences, they're final girls, far from the final girl's virginal origin. I love Ty West's X, which I know is divisive, and I feel like he does wonders even just in presenting a whole cast of pornographers with different attitudes and personalities. I particularly love the scene where Brittany Snow's character, a bubbly blonde who loves her work, talks about looking after her sick grandma in an interaction with the elderly Pearl. Her warmth and generosity go against all we're taught to believe about the corrupt and broken women working in X industries. And her mention of family reminds us she has a whole life outside of this. These films mentioned still involve sex and nudity, though it's easily argued that that's par for the course, but they do put working girls front and center. In that sense, it could be argued that these roles are empowering. But one reason I struggle to commit to the empowerment angle wholeheartedly, given that most of these characters are women, is that they're all written and directed by men. Only 3 of the 25 plus films we've looked at were directed by women, and only 1 directed to public knowledge by a sex worker. That being American Psycho, famously based on the book by Bret Easton Ellis, but directed by Mary Harron, Stripped to Kill, directed by Kat Shea, better known for Poison Ivy, starring Drew Barrymore, and the Soska sisters' Dead Hooker in a Trunk, which they made at film school before going on to make their better known project American Mary. While the only sex worker in the film is dead the entire film, Jen Soska, one of the directors, is herself a sex worker, stating in this article that she works as a dominatrix. So we have that, at least. Although I hate this film. I know it may seem like a tiring argument at this point, but I just prefer films to be made by people with lived experience. It's not a hard and fast rule. Certain men have made incredible films about women. Non-ex workers have made amazing films about ex work. Hello, Sean Baker. But when the gate is open for anyone to use anything for entertainment's sake, we end up with a lot of really, really bad stuff, spreading the aforementioned harmful ideas. To have men and non-ex workers ultimately in the position of telling the majority of stories about women and ex work on screen means that we're not hearing an authentic voice, at least not direct from the source. And when people argue that that's because there aren't women or ex workers with the talent, that's bollocks. You cannot tell me that of the millions of ex workers on the planet, that none of them have the drive or capacity to be brilliant filmmakers. Studios and producers have the power to support and position these people to make films, but they don't. One outlier in all of this is 2018's Cam. Well directed by Daniel Goldhaber, Cam was written by real-life cam girl and writer Issa Mazai, and this bleeds into the film in the best way possible. It's not about a serial killer, it's not full of gratuitous X, it's not a story of a woman with a tragic backstory. Metzai did a great interview with Vice, shout out to my former workplace, where she explained, the classic story of the ex-worker in media is innocent woman corrupted by a dark industry and she fights her way out of it. And I find that narrative incredibly problematic and incredibly damaging. It completely takes away a woman's agency to choose. You never just see the normal ex-worker who has made a conscious choice to engage in the industry and who views it as their business. With this established from the outset, Metzai's script sidesteps so many existing tropes. And instead, we get a story about fracturing one's personality by performing online. An idea so much more interesting and nuanced than killing cam girls, because it actually came from the mind of someone who knows the real anxieties and complexities of that work. Metzai and Goldhaber also collaborated a lot with actress Madeline Brewer to ensure she had a say in when the film's nudity felt true to character, and perhaps more importantly, collaborated with many, many other ex-workers. We talked to a variety of women and men who are engaged in this industry in order to make sure that it felt authentic to them, because I'm definitely not arrogant enough to think that I could make a film that would feel authentic to all sex workers if I just included only my own voice. Of course, it also is fine for Metzai to have made a film that is only based on her own experience, but you can see how much it means to Metzai to rectify damage done to her community on a whole. As with gender, race, sexuality, disability, when we let people tell their own stories, the stories themselves become so much more varied, layered, and honest. Speaking of Issa Mazai and Daniel Goldhaber, they have also written and directed the upcoming Faces of Death, which I'm quite excited for. This is based on a pretty legendary, although not exactly highly thought of, horror film with the same name. So, sadly, the damaging legacy of the hooker in horror already exists after decades of poor representation. To undo it is a challenge the industry seems ill-prepared to take on, as society at large still demonises ex-workers. Perhaps cinema can play a role in changing this, with films like Honora and Good Luck to You, Leo Grand helping audiences empathise with and become less fearful of the industry. What I hope to see is more stories like Cam, coming from ex-workers and giving new life to their on-screen legacy. I acknowledge it's a little complicated to demand stories be written by ex-workers, as not everybody doing the work wants to share that publicly, sadly with good reason. Metzai tells a horrible story about being asked in interviews with executives about the weirdest sex acts she'd performed personally when trying to discuss the screenplay for Cam. And this is just one tiny example of the many prejudices people face when ex-work is part of their public persona. With that in mind, being hypercritical of the voices behind these projects may not be helpful, but being conscious of the damage done in the past by uninformed provocateurs is. All in all, there are so many specific themes and experiences and unique elements of the mentality, of the world, of the skills that ex-workers have that would be fascinating to explore in horror. So let's put away the bleary-eyed junkie with 2 minutes of screen time and let some ex-workers finally make it to the 90-minute mark. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I have been Chelly, aka Girl on Film. I make videos about horror through a feminist lens. If you are enjoying this discussion, please give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment, tell me what you think, and hit the notification bell so you can see my future videos. All of this stuff genuinely makes a really big difference on YouTube's algorithm. And you can also support me more directly on patreon.com/girlonfilm. Oh my god, and also check out my last video because it flopped. It flop-teeted. It's one of my favorite videos I've ever done. So yeah, give that a look in. Here it is. Ooh. Bye.